everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So it's time for another weekly update and I have 7 books to talk to you about that I've finished since last week. So before we get started, leave some sort of bug emoji in the comments to let me know that you're here. So we'll begin with a 3-star book, and the first one I'll talk about here is The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. So this is like a collection of 5 short stories / novellas that are kind of like a prequel to the main Throne of Glass series. This covers a lot of like Selena's past in the Assassin's Guild. So we've got, again, these 5 stories. They're kind of like dealing with freeing slaves, there's meeting a healer, there's going to this desert assassin school, and generally like taking assignments back at home and trying to deal with like major crime lords and Selena's like not so great mentor. So, you know, I think this was decent. I definitely preferred the healer and the desert stories the most. These were just the most intriguing to me. Like, I really liked one of the characters that we get to meet in the healer story, who is actually the healer, and in the desert story, you know, like I do love a good magical school type setting and assassin school, I guess, so I really liked both of those, and I'm kind of curious to see if any of the side characters, just in general, like, I mean, particularly for these 2 stories, but in general, I think with this entire collection, I am curious if any of these side characters will eventually come up again in later books in the series. I will say, like, I didn't really feel the chemistry between Selena and Sam, and I just like kind of struggled to understand that relationship in general. Like, it was okay. I just don't really feel anything about it at all, which is not great. I do think we do get a lot more action here, and her abilities as an assassin are finally starting to be a little bit more believable for me. Like, that's definitely something I've had issues with in the first 2 books in the series, where I'm like, okay, she's supposed to be this great assassin, but like, is she really? So I think just getting to see her actually do more stuff here was really great. And I feel like that kind of is setting me up to enjoy the rest of the books in the series a bit more, hopefully. Just generally with this structure, it feels basically like one large story. There are some time skips in here, but they generally flow really well together. Selena is definitely like still spoiled, but I think she's actually a lot better here. I think she's more likable, especially in this healer story. I think she feels a lot more compassionate and like comes across as like actually wanting to help people. So I liked seeing that a lot more. And you know, I'm glad that I read this collection at this point, because I think, like, generally speaking, I've heard people say that, like, you should read it before jumping into Heir of Fire, which is the 3rd book, which I'll be doing pretty soon because my library haul just came in. But yeah, I mean, like, hopefully this will continue this like general upwards trend that I've been experiencing with these books so far. You know, like, I don't think this was anything particularly special, but I did enjoy kind of getting this background information. So the other 3-star book I'll talk about is Queens of Geek by Jen Wilde, and so I did this as a buddy read with Kat from Brews and Reviews, and this is a YA contemporary that basically follows 3 friends at this convention. So it was pretty enjoyable overall, but it's definitely a lot more about the relationships between all of these characters than anything else. It didn't feel as much like actually being at the convention as I would have liked. I mean, we do get glimpses here and there of like, you know, things going on at this convention, but I just generally feel like I could have used even more of this. I did like all of the main characters, Charlie, Taylor, and Jamie. I think, you know, there's a lot of really great representation here. Charlie is bisexual. She's a Chinese-Australian YouTuber, and she's the star of what I think is supposed to be like an indie film, but seems to be like really popular and kind of blowing up. I liked seeing her kind of accept herself and take a chance on love after being like burned in another relationship. We also have some autism representation here with Taylor. She also struggles with anxiety, and I just like seeing her kind of take a chance on getting outside of her comfort zone with not only this competition at this convention, but also this relationship that kind of ends up developing with Jamie. I did like all this representation here. Like I said, there was kind of this odd conversation between Taylor and Josie, who is another like convention goer. Both Taylor and Josie kind of bond over having Asperger's, and it just felt a little bit too forward to me, I think, to have these people who are strangers just kind of easily discussing this. And Kat described this conversation as more of like a checklist of characteristics, so I don't know, I feel like it could have been better throughout. More like, I think it would have been nice if this like autism representation had been like a little bit more spread out throughout the entire book rather than like mostly going all in on this one conversation. I do think this book has some predictable moments. I did like that Charlie is this YouTuber, but there's like the scene with Charlie and Alyssa, who's like also another famous YouTuber, and they're filming a video for YouTube, and I felt like this could have been like a little bit more realistic. They seem to just naturally do it all in one take, whereas I'm like, I know my experience filming videos, there's constantly like I like stumble over my words and have to like refilm things, I think, multiple times. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, this could obviously vary person to person. I just feel like this wasn't as realistic as I necessarily wanted, but like, I mean, it's not really that big of a deal. So yeah, I think this was cute, but I don't think it's particularly memorable for me. And, you know, in terms of representation, I'm going to encourage you to check out Kat's channel when she posts her review of Queens of Geek to get her take on particularly this autism representation. But yeah, so like, I had a good time with this overall. I don't know if that's necessarily something I'll reread though. So now we'll move to a 3.5-star book, and that will be Malice by Heather Walter. So this is an adult fantasy / fairy tale retelling, mostly of Sleeping Beauty. So we follow Alice, who is the Dark Grace, and she's kind of shunned and reviled for her dark magic, except for Aurora, who kind of accepts her, even though, you know, the same dark magic is what cursed her. So I did receive this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this comes out April 13th. I liked this, but I didn't love it as much as I was anticipating, which was a little strange. Like, I love any sort of retelling, and I, like, was really hopeful that I'd love this more, but I think there's a few things that kind of held me back from liking it more. I obviously did like these fairy tale aspects. You know, it's definitely very heavily drawing from Sleeping Beauty, but there were also elements, particularly in the beginning, of Cinderella, so I thought that was kind of fun. I think the pacing was alright overall. There are some repetitive parts for sure, and there's a few like predictable things, but you know, as a whole, like, I found myself pretty interested in it the entire time and definitely wanted to see how it ended. This society in particular is quite interesting. You know, it's extremely materialistic, and in this world we have these graces who are used for their abilities to provide enhancements such as like beauty or wit to these nobles. And even though Alice is feared and shamed, people still go to her for their dirty deeds, and there's, I think, a lot of interesting internal conflicts here for Alice because, you know, she just wants to be accepted and fit in with the other graces. I think the story is very much about her accepting who she is and just taking control of her life. So this was interesting to get, like, her point of view. Obviously, she's supposed to be this villain, and I think her journey is actually pretty understandable. Like, she's obviously not treated very well. So, like, I definitely understand her need and desire to take power back. However, you know, that being said, she doesn't always make the best or nicest decisions, but, like, you know, I'm kind of here for it. I mostly enjoyed following her, even though she's a bit naive at times. I liked how Aurora and Alice want to change things in this world. I mostly liked this romance, but I felt like we didn't get to see as much of it as I would have liked. There's also, you know, an interesting variety of characters and magical people. We've got, like, fae, there's shifters, there's these graces that I mentioned that have magic in their blood. So I think the world building was pretty well done for me. I did like how things ultimately, like, built up to the end, and I do feel pretty satisfied with where it ends up. I think I had seen that there's going to be another book in this series, so, like, I do feel like I would be interested in continuing to see what happens next, but, like, ultimately, I do feel pretty good about this story arc in general as, like, here's the origin story for, you know, the villain in Sleeping Beauty. So, yeah, I mean, like, overall, I had a good time with it. If you're interested in this premise, like, I would suggest checking it out. So now we'll talk about a couple of 4-star books, and the first one I'll talk about is Calculated Risk by Seanan McGuire. So this is an adult urban fantasy, and this is the latest installment of the Encrypted series, and this picks up, like, directly after Imaginary Numbers. Basically, our characters are stranded in another dimension, and we follow Sarah, who is this cuckoo, and basically it's like a telepathic humanoid wasp, and she's stranded with her allies, including some family members who no longer remember who she is. So Sarah is basically, like, trying to figure out who she is after some changes that have happened, and is also obviously trying to figure out how to get everyone back to their own dimension. So I think This was an odd one. I just don't think it was quite as good as some of the other installments. Like, I was looking back at my ratings, and I think I've rated everything else in this series 5 stars, but this was a little unusual for me to rate this one 4 stars. I think it does feel like it's the second half of a story, overall, rather than being more of like a self-contained book like the other ones tend to be. Obviously there are overall story arcs, and you do follow some of the same characters, but this one felt more like this overall story was broken into 2, I guess. I think my main struggle with this is that this plot of, like, Annie and Artie not remembering Sarah was just really stressful for me to read about. They're constantly debating on whether or not she's trustworthy, and it just kind of started to annoy me after a little bit. And I just think this took a little bit longer than usual to really get going. Like, it took me several days to read this book, and that's pretty unusual with this series. I will say I did really like this new setting of this, alternate dimension. It's not really something that we've seen before, and I'm excited to see how this could play into future installments. Like, I think we're building up to kind of exploring other dimensions, and, particularly with their grandma in the next installment, so I'm curious to see how that goes. This place is also populated by giant insects. Surprisingly enough, we have Greg the giant spider, and even though I'm really not a fan of spiders, I actually did kind of like Greg, and was like, yes, I'm here for Greg. So that was, I feel like that speaks pretty well to Seanan McGuire's character work to make me care about a giant spider. I continue to like Sarah and how she's obsessed with math. What's interesting is that equations that she has to deal with are almost sentient, which is a very intriguing thought. Going back to what I was talking about with Annie and Artie, I did get irritated with them, not trusting her. Obviously, it's understandable if, all of their memories of her got wiped out. Makes sense that they're I don't know about this, based on her cuckoo species, they're not generally trustworthy, but yeah, I don't know, it just was not my favorite. Sarah's obviously dealing with feeling very alone and trying to figure out her new abilities. She really doesn't want to invade people's minds without consent, unlike the rest of her species. I liked generally learning more about the Price family. There's some tidbits that we'll learn that seem like they could be important. There's also a short story here about hunting a siren at a convention, and I really liked this setting and just getting to see multiple Price family members working together. I think it is a lot of Annie not really enjoying being around Verity, and it did kind of abruptly end, but I did enjoy this overall. So I'm still going to continue reading this series. I really like it. Of Seanan McGuire's series, I think this is probably my favorite, though, I also really love the October Day series. So yeah, this is, I think, just a slightly weaker installment for me, but I would still highly recommend the series as a whole, and I can't wait to see what happens next. So the other 4-star book I'll talk about is The Best Thing You Can Steal by Simon R. Green, and I received this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this actually just came out April 6th. So this is an adult urban fantasy, and basically here we follow Gideon, who specializes in stealing things that normally can't be taken. He's even stolen his current identity. So he's planning a heist to steal the most valuable item from the worst man in the world, and obviously has to put together a crew to do this. So this was actually quite fun. I think it really reminds me a lot of the Nightside series, which I read, back in the day and really enjoyed. It's kind of more gritty and has this noir-esque quality to it. It's set in London. I think with the particular plot and the characters, it does remind me a lot of the Nightside, and I feel like this could be set in the same universe, so I'm kind of curious if that is actually the case. It's certainly short, but I feel really satisfied with the story overall. It's pretty quick to read, the pacing was great for me. I was interested the entire time. It's basically told in 4 acts, so there's assembling the crew, planning the heist, actually doing the heist, and then the aftermath. So I really liked learning about the background of all the different crew members. I think Simon R. Green has some really interesting character work in general. There's a lot of people with a variety of really interesting powers in his books. So here, we have Gideon, who is this kind of mysterious thief, and I'm curious who he was previously. We don't really get any answers about that. We just know that he has stolen this identity of this, long dead man, and he seems quite intriguing. We have Annie Anybody, who is his ex-girlfriend, and she can be like anyone she wants to be, and technology falls in love with her. Then we also have the Damned, the Ghost, and the Wilde card, and all of them have some, pretty interesting powers. They all have something in common, so it totally makes sense for them to team up. The actual heist was quite interesting, especially when you learn what the item is that they're actually trying to steal. In general, I think there's a lot of really useful, powerful, magical artifacts, and I really like the variety here. I think he does a pretty good job of, creating some very intriguing ideas. Some of them are certainly much more malevolent than others. I think the story does have some brutal moments here. There's some scenes with content warnings for things like gun violence. But I think, surprisingly, it's, a very cheerful and sweet story overall. The writing certainly has some snark and humor to it. I, again, really liked all of the different characters. I think they're kind of good in their own ways. Some of them, again, have some really cool abilities and powers. I don't actually know if this is the start to a new series, but I would definitely read more with these particular characters. So, yeah, I had a really great time with this. This definitely reminded me of what I really loved in the Nightside series. So, if you're looking for just a fun, quick urban fantasy book to read, I would definitely suggest picking this up. So now we'll get to the 5-star books, and the first one I'll talk about here is Wilde by Patricia Briggs. So this is an adult urban fantasy, and this is the latest installment of the Alpha and Omega series, and we follow werewolves Anna and Charles as they must investigate the disappearance of this small town on this packland, and they're dealing with something that has awakened in the forest. So this was really great to return to Charles and Anna. It's been a while since we've gotten an Alpha and Omega book, so I was super happy to return to them. Obviously I love the Marcy Thompson series, and this is set in the same world, but I feel like Anna and Charles have a really great relationship, and I really enjoy both of them, so it's just super fun to get more books in this series. What's interesting about this particular book is that music plays a large role. It's very involved with the main plot in an interesting way, but there's also some smaller tidbits I think throughout that just kind of further emphasize how important music is. Anna is, I think she was a musical prodigy from what I remember, but Anna and Charles have this really cute game where they play snippets of a song and the other one has to guess the song and artist. So I think that was just adorable. I thought something towards the beginning was really funny. She actually mentions the Hue, I think is how it's pronounced, but it's a Mongolian folk metal band that I actually really like, so just seeing a band that I know and love in the book was just such a fun fangirl moment for me. I was like, yes, I can totally relate to this. I'll try to remember to leave one of their songs linked because it is really interesting. Definitely check it out. Unsurprisingly, the writing is really lovely here again. I really love Patricia Briggs' writing. She has a very readable quality, and I think I'm always just super invested in anything she does. It's certainly easy to read and get involved in the story. We have some fun new creatures here, including this really ominous encounter with this mysterious creature in the forest. There's some pretty enjoyable reveals with this that I particularly liked, so yeah, I won't say more about it, but I think this creature is sort of this insidious foe that has mind control abilities, and woo boy, finding that makes for some exciting moments. I really liked this investigation into the disappearance of this town, as well as the really exciting battles that we get. I think the ending was pretty epic and crazy. I was totally here for it. Charles and Anna continue to be wonderful. I just love their bond so much. They do have just different personalities, but I think they also have some similarities. And I don't know, it's just, their relationship is just so sweet. So Charles is kind of in this enforcer role in the pack, and basically everybody else fears him, but not Anna. She really accepts him for who he is, and I think that's just super sweet. He's really protective of her without being overbearing. Anna is this Omega wolf, and she has sort of this calming effect on the wolves. She's a really valuable member of the pack. She has had some trauma in her past, and I feel like this particular plot is really about her saving herself and taking control of her past and her life. She's definitely a survivor. She's a really sweet character, and I just love her so much. I also really enjoyed learning more about Leah, and this is Bran's mate, and Bran is the main like leader, I guess, of the pack. And, you know, like in general, I have not liked Leah in any of the books. Like, she's kind of cold and not super likable, but I think here we get to learn more about her past, and it's like this really tragic but motivating story. I feel like this helps me like her more. Like, it certainly helps me understand her a lot more. So, like, I'm glad that we got to see this here, because, like, I'm curious to see how this will kind of change her in future books. There are some content warnings here for things like suicidal thoughts, past trauma, rape, and mind control. And I will say, like, I had completely forgotten about Anna's past and, like, some of the trauma that she experiences. So that was kind of like, reading this, I was like, oh, right, that was a big thing that I totally forgot. So do be aware going into that. But I just loved this so much, and I really can't wait for whatever Patricia Briggs has next. I definitely recommend this series, as well as the Mercy Thompson series. So the last 5-star book I'll talk about today is Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. So this is the sequel to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and this is a YA thriller. And here we follow Pip, who has created this podcast that examines the case from the first book, and she's kind of put her, like, investigation days behind her until someone she knows goes missing and the police won't do anything. So she's like, all right, well, I'm going to step up and do something. So this was so fast-paced. It's like a 400-page book, and I finished it in, like, I think I said it was like 2 hours and 45 minutes. Like, I could not put it down. I just flew through it and was like, I need to know what happens next. It's a really compelling plot to, you know, figure out what happened with this missing boy. There's some fun mixed media elements here, in particular with this podcast. It's definitely, like, helps with this quality of, like, being super quick to read. And I just generally like that there's this true crime element to it, and, you know, like, people are following this case of this missing boy in real time, and so I think that was kind of like an interesting involvement with people who are fans and who are trolls. With this particular plot, I did guess something that did not turn out to be right, but, like, was weirdly enough kind of on the same thought path as what actually happened. I did certainly suspect some people. I had a really great time just formulating guesses in general. In terms of the characters, with Robbie, I really like seeing him again. He's definitely sweet and very understanding of Pip. I continue to really love Pip again here. I really like seeing her struggle with who she is and just kind of accepting herself and embracing that, like, what she's passionate about. I really like how she tries to help and how she's just, like, really tireless in her hunt. Pip is certainly not perfect, but I like seeing how she like, is aware of some of her more destructive tendencies and kind of, like, tries to deal with this in kind of, like, a more healthy manner. I also just really like seeing the trial and aftermath of the first book here, and generally, like, how this affects Pip, but also some of the other characters in this story. Like, some of it is really heartbreaking, but I just really liked this continuation. So yeah, I mean, like, I had obviously, like, a fabulous time with this. I would highly suggest this series if you're looking for, like, a quick YA thriller. It kind of reminds me of Riverdale in some aspects. So yeah, this is a fantastic series, and I really can't wait for the next one. With that, those are all the books that I have to talk to you about today that I've finished since last week. So I am actually not currently reading anything, because I literally just finished The Best Thing You Can Steal before filming this video, so I'm not sure what I'm going to get into next. I think there's the Because We Can Readathon coming up this next week, so I need to figure out what all I want to read for that. I know the group book is Reflection by Elizabeth Lim, and that is a kind of, it's like one of these Disney twisted tales that's has something to do with Mulan going to the underworld. I'm not entirely sure, but I will be reading that one. There's like 7 prompts. I'm not sure if I will end up doing one book per prompt or just kind of like combining some of the prompts into like a book or something. My tentative plan is to make like a short going over my TBR, so maybe I'll post that Monday, we'll see. There are some arcs that I have on NetGalley that I do want to read fairly soon. So we've got Firebreak, which is, I think, a sci-fi thriller, and Day Zero, which is like a post-apocalyptic sci-fi. So both of those sound pretty good. Those come out in May, so, you know, it would probably be a good thing for me to get to those sooner rather than later. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question of the day, have you ever been to a convention? I've been to one, it's GalaxyCon in Raleigh, and it was a pretty good time. Like, it is a little bit stressful, I think, for me to be around so many people. I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link is in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.